Hello, girl. Say hi to me. How are you? Oh, are you going to come to the meeting on Wednesday?
Oh, yeah.
With her who? Wednesday from 4 to 6.
Wednesday. The other way. Ay, no me digas.
Llámenos, por favor, siéntense. Soy chiquitita. Hola.
Hola.
Hermana. Hermano. Oh.
Go ahead, Sylvia.
Which one?
You can pull
What?
that down.
Oh, I
Just pull
can?
it down to get, yeah, because that's set up for.
To speak. Okay. This is the speaking. Okay. All right. You know, you guys are going to have to build a little stool for us chiquitas here, you know. So we're not way down here. But at any rate, I'm standing on my toes, and not just to be seen, but really I am so excited that we're having this wonderful afternoon, and I want to introduce to you these wonderful, amazing scholars, people, creators, and we have Don Usner. We have Enrique Lamadrid, and we have Levi Romero. And let me just tell you briefly about them, and that is that they were all born here. And so it's important to see how they've gone far and wide, developed so many wonderful paths in creation, and are bringing those things back to our community, which is so important. Their community, all our community. Okay, thank you. Let's all give them a hand.
Buenas tardes desde Dios. Before we move forward, we wanted to mention that a dear friend of ours, Cipriano Vitil, passed away recently.
Yep.
This amazing human being, musical troubadour, historian, pretty much name it and he did it. But one of the most amazing and beautiful things about that gentleman was his kindness and generosity and his humility. I've been around a lot of great people in my life, thankfully, and he was certainly one of them, but he was always one of the most humble and kind and generous people I've ever met. So in memoria de Cipriano Vigil, we dedicate to this afternoon, or we tonight, this evening, to Cipriano Vigil, who was actually born in China. Don't spoil the punchline. There's a young woman, she's fantastic. She actually grew up in Peñasco. She's a young poet, lives in Albuquerque now. And her name is Savannah Rodriguez. If you haven't heard of her yet, you will at some point. But she grew up in Peñasco, right? Chamizal is a suburb of Peñasco. And so I texted her and I said, que en paz descanse Cipriano Vigil. And she wrote back, oh no, that's really sad. And I said, yes, he was actually born in China. And she texted me back and she says, I just got through looking at his picture and it does appear like he's Asian. And I said, no, Savannah, he was from China, Chamizal. She didn't know that Chamizal was that China was the nickname for Chamizal, even though she grew up there. But, so anyway, en memoria de Cipriano Vigil de Chamizal, de China, and he lived also in ¿dónde estaba viviendo al último? El Rito, ¿verdad? So, bueno, pues, sigamos entonces. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Oh, and it was Enrique's idea that we all stand up there with our shades.
Let's just take a moment of silence for him. events. Thank you. I am Silvia Ernestina Vergara, and I am the program director of these series of events that celebrate the 300 commemoration year of the Embudo Land Grant. And so I'm going to read about the background, the wonderful lives of each one of these amazing people, so that we can honor that also. Don Usner, just take this out. Don Usner is one of New Mexico's most celebrated photographers. His work has been featured in numerous books, publications, and exhibitions. Born in Embudo and raised in Los Alamos and Chimayo, he has written several books, including Sabino's Map, Life in Chimayo, Old Plaza, Benigna's Chimayo, Cuentos from the Old Plaza, Valles Caldera, a vision of New Mexico's National Preserve, winner of a Southwest Book Award, and Orale, Lowrider, custom made in New Mexico. His photographs and writing appear in many other publications, including the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Land and People, El Palacio, New Mexico Magazine, La Herencia, and others. His writing and photography reflects his long and intimate association with the land and people of northern New Mexico. Besides his diverse experience as an important educator in colleges and schools, he is a founding board member of the Chimayo Cultural Preservation Association and the Española Lowrider Museum Coalition. He was named a New Mexico Luminaria by the New Mexico Community Foundation and an award given to New Mexicans. Okay, let's welcome Don Usner. It's kind of louder for sure.
Great, well thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here in this great place. And it's a marvel to have this library here in Dixon. It's a moving target. We're working on similar kinds of activities in Chimayo, and I wanted to invite you all to come to Chimayo, to the Chimayo Museum, which probably, how many of you have heard of the Chimayo Museum? Well, that doesn't count, I just told you. It's a great place, and we were envious of your library. This is quite an accomplishment, really important for the community. And I'm from a different community, Chimayo. It's what I consider my place of the heart. But I always felt very connected to Embudo because I was born here in Embudo. And everybody always asked why did my mom come to Embudo, because she was living in Los Alamos at the time. And she had a routine. She would, first of all, Embudo had the only female doctor around, and it's a pleasure to meet some people, Virginia and Betty, Betty knew my great aunt worked in the hospital. And, so my mom had some kin here, and there was a female doctor, so she knew her. By the time I came along, the fourth or fifth children, she had a routine down. She'd tell my dad, it's time to go have a baby. And they'd stop at her to have a red enchilada at a restaurant in Española, and then come have a baby in Blue. So she had it all figured out. And so we've always had connections here with cousins and relations in the hospital and with the Presbyterian Church, which is a very influential institution both here and in Chimayo. It's a great educational pipeline that got a lot of kids on a great educational tract, and from here to the Manal High School and on to the University of New Mexico. So I'm going to talk about a different place in Dixon, different land grant history in Dixon. This is the Mira and Pacheco map from ¿cuál es la fecha? 1779. Yeah, and it's just to give an overview of this wonderful region we're all gifted with, having connections to, or been raised in, or born in. It's the northern Rio Grande Valley, and you can see that, well, you can't see actually, but if you got up close, you can see that Chimayo and the plaza where I'm from and talking about is just really the next drainage to the south from here, coming off the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And it's one of 295 grants in New Mexico by count. And you can see how they're spread mostly in the north and various sizes. And they all have a similar trajectory. Embudo lost its rights to most of the grant, entirely to the grant. It was the Court of Land Claims ruled against their claim for the grant. Chimayo was part of the Santa Cruz grant, and it was granted and confirmed in the American courts, but stripped of all the upland communal lands. So the private grants in the bottom of the valley were recognized, but the communal lands were never included in the grant. This is a view of Chimayo, and the hill in the background, the tall hill, that hill is 7,000 feet high, and so it's 1,000 feet above the valley floor. And the name of that hill is Tewa, is Chimayo. And that's where the name came from, for Chimayo. And there's been a lot of discussion about what Chimayo means, and lots of rumors and misinformation, but I got the right story. I heard from Alfonso Ortiz, who corrects all the books and all the literature, to point out that it literally means just the hill of the east. The Tewa world, their cosmology had 4 sacred hills, and this was the hill of the east, and it sort of marked a boundary of their Pueblo world. And behind it, you can just see a little bit of Truchas Peak, which is the mountain of the east. And there are important sites of pilgrimage, and the hill of Chimayo here has a cave on the side, which was a sacred spot to Tewa, it still is. And they used to visit it and have legends about it, which got translated into my mom's generation as La Cueva del Chivato. The Cueva del Chivato is a very scary, ominous place you wanted to avoid at all costs. So we went there whenever we could. It's extremely difficult to get to, though. And it's a very special site. And I've been asked many times to take people there. And most of the people I've taken have regretted that they went. It's a very difficult walk, and as it should be. And I don't ever show pictures of it because it deserves to be a private, quiet place. So this is another view of the Chimayo Valley, and you can see, like so many northern New Mexico valleys, it hugs the base of the uplands and is irrigated by acequias. There's some 15 or 20 acequias watering Chimayo. And this is the Rio Quemado, which is the river that feeds the ditch. It comes to my particular neighborhood of Chimayo, which is right here in this picture. I took this with my big tripod, and a very, very tall ladder. But this is a remarkable neighborhood. It's one of the last remnants of what was the basic settlement pattern for northern New Mexico, which is defensive plazas. And there's a long story behind the evolution of the plaza as a community form, and they were all over New Mexico. There are hundreds of them, but this one's the only one that retains its original shape. There's a plaza here in Dixon, just down the road, and it's kind of lost that rectangular defensive structure. But I grew up just on the bottom left of this picture was my grandmother's house, and I spent summers there, and I had a tremendously positive, wonderful experience. in this old neighborhood that preserves so much of the history, not just in the buildings, but in the stories, in the people, in the traditions. And I grew up literally about 100 feet from the plaza and never knew it was there. It was just another bunch of buildings to me. It wasn't until I was in college actually studying cultural geography that I became aware of the fact of this incredible remnant of the Spanish colonial frontier. And so my first big project was focused on the plaza, and I was curious about what people remembered about it. And one of the first people I interviewed was a woman named Amada Trujillo, and she pulled this out. It's kind of hard to see on that screen. But this is a hand-drawn map of the plaza that her husband Sabino drew to represent the plaza in the early 20th century. It has the names of all the families and some of the activities in the plaza, where the gardens were. Some really important information. I was working on a master's thesis in cultural geography, and in geography, everything you do has to be focused on a map. So I was so happy I didn't have to draw a map, because Sabino did it already. It became the centerpiece for my research and studying Chimayo. It still follows today, I still continue with. I took that map and traced it on tracing paper back in the day before scanners and made a positive of it. And it's just loaded with information. It has a little notation that says no fences, pointing out that there's no fences in the plaza originally. Before American surveys came in and assigned everybody a piece of paper and taxes, and they all threw up fences. There's a public rights of way all around the plaza and through the plaza. And most importantly, it showed the family names of everybody living on the plaza. And this is Amanita, who showed me the map. And that's the cover of the book, which I brought a copy of and show you if you like. So the plaza itself was a place to roam around as a kid and play. And these buildings always held a lot of magic for me. This is the old general store and post office. And through many, many interviews and research, I learned this is where the patron of the plaza lived, Don Victor Ortega, who ruled with an iron fist. That was actually a very good man also. This is the western side of the plaza. And one of the interesting things I discovered is if you look at the south side where Tio Victor lived, pretty nice stature, tall roofs, tall ceilings, high roofs, pitched roofs. He had the authority, the money, and the control. He was on the State Constitutional Convention in 1910 that wrote the first Constitution of New Mexico. And he was among the couple dozen Hispanics who insisted on including the requirement that Spanish be written into all the laws of New Mexico. And he was a big advocate for Spanish language and culture. On the west side was where the plebe lived, the working class. And their houses were much more modest. They didn't have pitched roofs. And they fell into disrepair over time as people left for work. But you can also see the Plaza Capilla here, the Oratorio de San Buenaventura, which is a really important place, full of stories as a religious meeting ground. So I became obsessed with the buildings and these wonderful relics of the original architecture, which are so well preserved there. It's because it's off the beaten path. And one of the great ironies is it's so well preserved because nobody's tried to preserve it. It's just like it was and remains. And one of the biggest struggles I've faced in the 30 years, by the way, 30 years since that book came out. And it's still in print. I have a copy here. You can have a copy too. In all that time, there's been a great struggle going on to talk about preservation of the plaza. A lot of outside historians and anthropologists have become aware of it and are really keen on taking care of it in a positive way. The local community is not so keen on that. And so I tell all these stories in the book, but one of the big events around that conflict arose in the mid-80s when Robert Redford wanted to film inaugural Beanfield War in the plaza. And most plaza residents were thrilled because he made a promise that he would restore the buildings, clean up the gardens, bring it back to some sense of its historical existence, and everybody was for it except for one family, and they fought it tooth and nail, and it was a long, drawn-out, bitter fight. And finally, Redford threw up his hand and said, "Forget it, I'll go to Truchas and build my own plaza." So once again, it fell into disrepair. But it's this strange contradiction, because I love the rundown old buildings. And right now I'm involved with the museum and restoration of the plaza. And it's a very tricky thing. Like this building, for example, is the Casa Rudy Cruz. And we're raising money to fix it up, but who wants to fix that up? It's just, I love the crack in the wall and everything. So growing up, I was obsessed with these buildings and playing in them. And some of them are abandoned with stuff still sitting on the kitchen table, and dishes in the cupboards and medicines in the cabinets. And it was just a wonderful wonderland, because while I was running around playing here, I was listening to my grandmother tell stories at night. She'd tell me cuentos from the old days. All of them took place in Spain, and kings and queens and princes, and she spoke this old variety, old lexicon of Spanish. And I was not allowed to speak Spanish, but they couldn't stop me from hearing it, so I picked up a lot of it. And so the buildings, the language, the stories all kind of combined to create this real sense of wonder in me. This is the interior of the oratorio on the plaza, and every one of these buildings is full of stories, but perhaps none more so than the oratorio. And it's been in the care of the Ortega family for generations, and it's just off the quiet and off the beaten path, and has quite a different trajectory from the Santuario, which had about the same vintage, same artist painted the altarpiece here, but this one has not become a tourist mecca yet. The ceiling is inscribed with the names of families of men who re-roofed the plaza in 1873. So it's wonderful to go in there and find your family names on the ceilings, and their little coat of arms they draw. So this is the west side about 10 years ago, and we did undertake 2 buildings to restore very cautiously. In the next picture, this is that same building now. It's amazing, and this was done with the help of Cornerstones Community Foundation, Community Partnerships, and Ivanu Construction, who some of you may know about. They did a whole renovation in San Juan Pueblo Plaza, Okeawinge. So I think we did a pretty good job. This is another building. This is the oldest house in the plaza. It was the home of my great-great-great-grandfather, Horacio Ortega. It's a beautiful building, and he's the one who gave permission for people to cluster their homes around and form the plaza. And then about 20 years ago, this happened to it. So it's in a very precarious state. We're trying to figure out a way to acquire this and restore it. Oh, yeah, I already showed you that one. So I just want to run through some of these old people that I was obsessed with and hearing their stories. And the wonderful thing was I had this map, so I'd go talk to people. This is my grandmother, Benita Chavez. And I'd say, yeah, I want to hear about the old plaza. And they say, yeah, pa qué? We left that place a long time ago. It's just run down. And I'd spread the map out, and they'd say, mira nomás. And they'd start pointing out the family, remembering people. It became a great tool for storytelling. And my grandmother was the most masterful of all storytellers. She kept us enraptured every night with these wonderful tales, and then tales about the old days. So my initial project was to interview all these people as much as I could. And this is my aunt, Melita, who was my tia Juanita's sister. And some of you actually knew Juanita. And she worked at the hospital here. And this is the comadre de Mercedes Trujillo. A wonderful woman. She was had a great character. This is her hoeing her chili patch when she was about 90 years old. This is my mama, Teresita, Mercedes' sister. And this is my mom in Teresita with the map spread out on the table and my tape recorder going. That's how I did all my research, quote. So these are... So I was always running into this, and I can tell you a lot of stories about conflicts and confrontations and dialogue and lack of dialogue. But this guy, Gary Trujillo, we came to be very good friends, and he was, in his later years, he died tragically about 5 years ago. He was really embarrassed about ever having posed with this sign. Really changed his attitude and became really part of the community, and he came to our museum meetings and helped out and changed his tune. We finally won him over to convince him that we were really interested in taking care of the place, not exploiting it. And this is his brother, Terry, who almost nobody can tell apart. I think that's Terry. Yeah, that's Gary. Terry and Gary, infamous people. They were the trolls of the plaza for many years. They scare people off. Lorenzo, he's the last person still living on the plaza who was born there. And this is a little map I did since I was a geography major, showing the connections and families on the plaza. Wow. It's just to indicate it was a network. And those lines, the bold lines represent primary relationships, like first immediate family, and then the smaller lines represent lesser, more distant connections. But virtually everybody was connected somehow. It's really made for a really tight community. Made it very difficult to find non-related partners too. This is the Ortega family. There were 15 in total, and my great-grandmother had 15 children in a 2-bedroom adobe house. And I just find that so amazing. This is my grandparents, great-grandparents, Reyes and Genoveva. So besides the buildings, these people who were full of stories and language, we had a great historical photo collection that we've gathered for the museum. And each photo came from a different, each group of photos came from a different family, and each had a story. And this is one of the most compelling stories this photo tells to me, because the baby being held up in the air was Tina Villa, who was a distant relative who lived right outside the plaza. And this was right, her mother had just died in childbirth, and the baby was presented to her mother's sister to raise. And this is her holding up the baby not long after she was given the child. And so to hear that story from Tila and have the picture, how they connected to the building that's still standing, all makes for a great feeling. And there's the auditorium back in about 1960. And this is from a collection of photographs that the first mission teacher left, Prudence Clark. And she came from Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And she was destined for this place called Chimayo, which the new local newspaper said, where the climate is decidedly tropical. And she took with her, of course, the necessary piano. And she came to Chimayo with her tuberculosis-laden sister. And Chimayo had no running water, no electricity, no one spoke English, and everybody hated Presbyterians. And she was nearly run out of town, but she became well-loved, and actually she married one of the students from her first grade school class. It's one of the great scandals of Chimayo history. She waited until he turned 18. And she was I think she was about 25 years older than him. And started a tradition now. A lot of women would come to teach in Chimayo and marrying local guys. I find it ironic, this is my Tio Isaias at the John Hyson Presbyterian School, which was a wonderful, wonderful school. But I just find it so ironic. Here's the history they were studying. They were dressing up as pilgrims and reenacting that whole story. They had no idea that in their backyard was this plaza that was hundreds of years old that bore a whole different historical story that was never shared until recent years. So part of her collection was really interesting because she carried a little brownie camera and she took pictures of everyday things that the people thought unremarkable. In those days, photography was you stood in front of a camera and got your portrait taken. she took pictures of everyday life, and I always make the analogy, it would be like somebody coming to your house now taking pictures of you loading the dishwasher. Totally mundane, but fascinating to her because she already came from a different world. This is threshing wheat, which was a yearly activity. She took this one, labeled it, some local girls carried water from the ditch, and cleaning chilies in the plaza. She was a wonderful documentary photographer. And so in our museum, we have this collection of photographs that really tell a great story. Oh, I throw another little promotional thing. This is another one of my books. This is, so some of you might have seen it. It's a collection of dichos. Now, dichos are such a common piece of Hispanic culture. And Sage Roll's here, and his book, Dichos y Dichos, is over here. He's also an admirer of dichos. But my grandmother, my mom and I started writing down all the dichos that grandma used to use in daily life. Each one of them pithy and full of fun, humor, and wisdom. We came up with 270. And they're all in this book. And this is a collection of the cuentos my grandmother used to tell me at bedtime. They're all in Spanish and English, and they're just wonderful tales from the old world. Now, the other piece that I want to mention is this is a little bit of a story. My mom inherited a box of documents, and she had it in her closet in Los Alamos. And one day she was driving to Chihuahua to take care of her mom, who was at the time 102 years old. And she was backing out of her driveway, and she saw some smoke on the horizon. And thought, I'm going to be gone for a week. What's the one thing I would take if I could just take one thing from my house in case I was threatened with fire? She went back in and got that box of papers. And that's the only thing she got out. She never got back home. The house burned to the ground. Wow. So this is, she and I sat down on her kitchen table and spread them out, and we found a treasure trove. 200 and some, almost 300 documents going back to 1706. And this is the first one, which is a land grant petitioning the King of Spain for a grant of land in Chihuahua, written by Luis Lopez. And it's just a wonderful, it's loaded with history and information. It describes a piece of property, a piece of which I still own. I have a paper trail going back to 1706 for this piece of land because of her saving those documents. But not only that, they can just contain all this information about life in Chihuahua in the 18th and 19th centuries and 20th. And here's the backside of a sign by Jose Cuervo Valdez, the governor of the state. And it's just the language of it, and it mentions a lot of interesting little anecdotes, like Luis Lopez was coming back to New Mexico after the Pueblo Revolt to reclaim some land that while he was gone, the Tano Indians had come to live on. And they had built it or cleaned out a ditch there. And that ditch is still flowing. And it's the focus of a lot of controversy now because the document's unclear on if the Tano Indians built the ditch or if the Spanish colonists had built it and the Tanos were reusing it. And that brings to bear a lot of weight in the water rights settlements going on. And that language from this document is being used in that discussion. But, so I'll just run through a few series over here. This one is signed by the Governor Gaspar Domingo de Mendoza in 1743. And this one by Mendinueta in 1771. So they're just amazing documents. This one is fascinating. Gervasio Ortega, who was my great-great-great-grandfather, describes in this document how he went to hunt buffalo on the plains, as he did every year, a group of men. And while he was gone, his father died, and his stepmother, his father's second wife, settled his estate in the absence of Gervasio being there. He gave it all away to her kids. And he was petitioning the governor to write this whole document, to right this whole wrong. But it's just rich with descriptions of what he did in the court case. And this was really interesting because it's I think this is the page. think I highlighted on there, if you can, probably can't read it too well, but he's describing in his last will and testament, this is his last will and testament, he describes a torreon on the plaza. And I don't know if you're familiar with torreon, but the torreon is a watchtower. And there's one surviving in the plaza. The only one surviving in the location it was built in the state. And so he describes the location of that. And he also describes wanting to leave something to his indito. His indito is his Indian servant or slave. And he was very careful to articulate it. He wanted to leave him the house, and land, and a pistol. This one is really interesting because in the middle, and eventually these become easy to read. It's kind of hard at first. But he mentions a peña azul as a marker for the land boundary, an outcropping of blue rock. And I was always wondering, where is the blue rock? How am I ever going to find the blue rock to know where this boundary is? And my mom finally told me, the blue rock. Everybody knows where the blue rock is. And we used to go play there as kids, so she took me there. And this is the blue rock. It's mentioned in this document from 1712. And it's still a marker of the boundary between two families. That's when he mentions me and Dito. So servitude, slavery was part of life in that time. Relatives who were traded for with the Apaches and Comanches, as most of us do in northern Mexico. How am I doing on time? Nobody knows. Keep going.
No, you have a few more minutes.
Okay, I go really fast. Anyway, this was a great little letter of Juan Domingo Ortega writing to his family. He had moved to Mora across the mountains. And he was describing telling his parents in Chihuahua that his daughter was going to get married. So it's full of official legal documents and personal correspondence. It's a wonderful collection. I think it's the largest collection of documents from a community outside of the main centers of Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And I just donated it to the History Library in Santa Fe. It was sitting in my kitchen in a box. And it was a great thing to bring out at a party, but I knew sooner or later I was going to spill a beer on it. So I'll just run quickly through these. There's a whole bunch of different placitas in Chihuahua besides the Plaza Tercero, and I began to explore those eventually. Of course, everybody knows the Santuario, and that's a long story behind that. And the pilgrimage to the Santuario, and different placitas. And I began to expand and explore and interview people beyond the plaza. Met some wonderful people who each had their own tale. This man taught me how to relax. He had these chairs planted literally all over his property, and he just migrated from chair to chair. And this is Benedito, who was a great guy at La Otra Banda, the other bank. And I gave him my book, which he's looking at there. He was delighted until he revealed to me he doesn't know how to read. So that was a bit of a problem. And this is the Modesto, who was anything but Modesto. And Modesto and his family. And this is Martha Vigil showing me the difference between buñuelos and sopapillas. These are buñuelos that don't ever call them sopapillas. Ezequiel. And then I ran into the lowrider scene, which I had been frightened of ever since I was a kid. Beware of the lowriders. This is one of my first lowrider family friends. Each one of those kids has a car. And I had them when they were this little already. So I began to explore not only old people, but all ages. And the lowriders, really, that was a great experience mingling with them. This is a great story. I was driving through with a friend of mine who's a photographer, an old man. I should talk, right? He was in his 90s right then. And we saw this biker party going on. I said, I'd love to go in there, but into the yard, but I don't know what would happen. He said, nothing. What could happen? He said, a lot could happen. So we pulled in there, and this guy came out and using language I can't repeat. Basically asked us what the hell we were doing there. But we just began to talk to him. We had a great conversation, a great connection. Ended up having a bunch of friends in the biker community. I find this picture really interesting because the garage builds lowriders, and the mural there is a mural of the Santuario with lowriders in front of it. And so that sense of place is inherent in all the people there. They're really proud and attached to have a spiritual connection to their place, even in the garages. So I'm gonna use this a few more minutes. So we started a museum 30 years ago, the same day that the book was released, the museum opened, and it's turned into this wonderful gathering place. In fact, this is Cipriano Vigil playing for this event. We've been hosting all kinds of events and lectures, Tom Chavez, and we've taken on a few buildings. This is what we call Casa Martina, when we first purchased it, and this is it now. So we tried to restore it very faithfully, mud plaster, and we decided not to give it electricity or running water because it never had it before, which now we're wondering if that was so smart. And we host volunteer days for cleanup. It will take any age. And this is one of our best fiestas of the year. It's San Isidro Day. We bring water into the plaza and have music and plant. And we have a Los Maestros art program, teaching kids traditional arts. And that's it. Anybody have any questions or answers? Yes.
You said that you were not allowed to speak Spanish. Could you explain the circumstances of that?
Well, there was a whole cultural thing that there was a real wave of interest in Americanizing and leaving behind your Spanish roots and language, every piece of the culture. We were particularly exposed to it because I went to school in Los Alamos and lived there during the school year. And they always wanted to play down our connection to Hispanic culture. I see Marie Pacheco's here. She's
Schoolmates in 7th grade.
just a few years ago.
Yeah, just a few years ago. 7th grade, we played the trumpet, played the trombone.
No.
You played the
Saxophone.
saxophone. Then you went to trombone.
No.
We had a class in that.
Literally. I was in traffic court a few years ago because I had gotten a ticket I didn't think I deserved, and I went to take the class, and instead of paying the ticket, it was an act of protest. And they were reading out the names of all the people getting their certificate. And the last person, the woman handed it out, looked at me and said, "Donnie Usner, I gave you your first job as a paper boy." And that was Marie's mom. So. Anyway, any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, that's a very large collection of written documents. And yet, my feeling from the things that I heard growing up was that people were poor and ignorant and could not read and write. That's a lot of writing.
Well, that's one of the remarkable things about the old plaza in Chihuahua. There was a whole lot of people in every community. There was always a nexus of people who could write and who carried forth with those documents. And there was a strong lineage of that in the Ortega family, which is my grandmother's family. There was lots of justices of the peace and other officials that were always maintaining those documents. And they kept them so carefully, protected them. I mean, it just really blows my mind to think that for 300 years they were handed down and cared for, and almost lost in that fire. And they had a tremendous sense of their propriety to the place, and they wanted to make sure that was recorded. And they brought all those papers to when the Court of Private Land Claims came, in the 1910s and 20s, they had all the documentation for their grant, which was a smart thing.
Well, I have a box of papers also, and one of the things that was in the box was a prayer book that was from the Morada.
Yes.
And apparently they are not uncommon, and that people, I mean, of course, it's a treasure, and my nephew, Sylvia's son, will inherit it, because he isn't, and no one should have it. Not quite yet, but, it is, I just was surprised at how very literate and how beautiful it was.
Yeah.
So who was teaching the writing?
That's the thing that amazes me too, especially back in the 1800s. There were no public schools. And there was still always a core of people who wrote and read very well. Yeah, yeah. Those are treasures. My mom also had a prayer book from the Morada. And that was the only thing that wasn't in the box, so it burned in the Psalms. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, next in line is Levi.